My husband skipped our daughter's funeral for his secretary's birthday. Dead kid won't know I'm gone. The secretary posted yacht photos. When the family asked about him at the funeral, I had his and the secretary's yacht photos projected on the wall during the memorial slideshow, right after our daughter's baby pictures. Mrs. Hartwell, we need both parents here immediately. The doctor's words cut through the phone like shards of glass. Emma had collapsed during recess and they couldn't stabilize her heart rhythm. I was already running to my car when I realized I didn't know where Richard was. His secretary said he'd left for lunch 3 hours ago. His phone went straight to voicemail. My daughter was fighting for her life and her father had simply vanished. The drive to Children's Hospital felt endless despite breaking every speed limit. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had gone white. I kept hitting redial on Richard's number, each unanswered ring making my chest tighter. Where could he possibly be that was more important than this? Emma's school had called me first, always me. Never Richard, even though his name was listed as the primary emergency contact. The school nurse, Mrs. Davidson, had tried to stay calm while explaining how Emma suddenly grabbed her chest during dodgeball and crumpled to the playground asphalt. Other children screamed. Teachers rushed over. The ambulance arrived within minutes, but Emma's lips had already turned blue. I burst through the hospital's automatic doors, my heels clicking frantically against the polished floor. The pediatric wing smelled like antiseptic and fear, a combination I'd grown to hate over the past year since Emma's diagnosis. Dr. Martinez met me at the nurse's station, his usually warm demeanor replaced by professional urgency. Claire, we've got her stabilized for now, but her heart rate is extremely irregular. We need to discuss some aggressive treatment options, and hospital policy requires both parents for consent. I've been trying to reach my husband. I paused, realizing I had no idea how to finish that sentence. At work? In a meeting? Having an affair? The possibilities had grown darker over recent months. He's coming as soon as he can. Dr. Martinez nodded, but I caught the flicker of judgment in his eyes. This wasn't the first time Richard had been unreachable during one of Emma's emergencies. 3 months ago, when she'd fainted during her piano recital, I'd sat alone in this same hospital for 6 hours before Richard finally appeared, smelling like expensive wine and offering excuses about a client dinner that couldn't be rescheduled. Can I see her? My voice cracked despite my efforts to stay strong. Emma looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical precision. Wires snaked from her chest to monitors displaying numbers I'd learned to read with reluctant expertise. Her dark curls spread across the white pillow, and her skin had that translucent quality that appeared whenever her condition worsened. Mommy. Her voice was barely a whisper. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here. I took her hand, careful not to disturb the 4-line tape to her wrist. Where's Daddy? I asked the nurse to call him too. The innocent trust in her question made my stomach clench. He's on his way, baby. You know how busy he gets at work. Emma nodded weakly, accepting my lie with the same grace she'd shown when accepting Richard's absence from every other crisis. At 10 years old, she'd already learned not to expect too much from her father. The realization made me want to scream. My phone buzzed with a text message. Finally, Richard responding to my dozen frantic calls. But when I read the message, my blood turned cold. An important deposition. Can't leave now. Handle whatever it is and fill me in tonight. Handle whatever it is. Our daughter's heart was failing and he called it whatever it is. I stepped into the hallway and called his office directly. This is Claire Hartwell. I need to speak with Richard immediately. Oh, Mrs. Hartwell. His secretary Janet sounded uncomfortable. Mr. Hartwell left around noon for lunch. He said he'd be out for the rest of the afternoon. But he just texted me about being in a deposition. Silence stretched between us before Janet cleared her throat. I'm sorry, but there are no depositions scheduled today. Would you like me to take a message? The lie hit me harder than the medical emergency. Not only was Richard unavailable when Emma needed him most, but he was actively deceiving me about where he was. While our daughter fought for every heartbeat, her father was somewhere living a secret life. I returned to Emma's room, plastering on a smile that felt like glass cutting my face. She was dozing fitfully, her small chest rising and falling with effort. The heart monitor showed irregularities that made the nurses frown and adjust medications with increasing frequency. Mrs. Hartwell? Dr. Martinez appeared beside me. We really need to move forward with treatment. Emma's condition is deteriorating and we can't wait much longer. What kind of treatment? Emergency surgery to implant a temporary pacemaker. It's risky, but without it. He didn't need to finish the sentence. I looked at Emma's peaceful face, then at the consent forms Dr. Martinez held. My signature would authorize them to cut open my 10-year-old daughter's chest while her father was God knows where, probably with God knows who, treating his family like an inconvenience. How long do I have to decide? Minutes, not hours. I tried calling Richard one more time. The phone rang twice before going to voicemail, meaning he'd actively declined my call. In the background of his outgoing message, I could hear Emma's laughter from last Christmas morning, back when she still believed her daddy hung the moon. The irony was crushing. Richard had always prided himself on being a provider, working long hours to give us the best life possible. The big house in Westfield with the circular driveway. Private school for Emma. Vacations to places other families only dreamed about. He'd built us a beautiful life, but somewhere along the way he'd forgotten to actually live it with us. Emma stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Mommy, my chest hurts. I know, sweetheart. The doctors are going to fix it. Will Daddy be here when I wake up? I smoothed her hair back, choosing my words carefully. Daddy loves you very much, Emma. He's just very busy taking care of things for our family. Even as I said it, I wondered what things could possibly be more important than this moment. What meeting, what client, what emergency could justify abandoning your child when she needed you most? I signed the consent forms with a hand that shook with more than just fear. As they wheeled Emma toward the operating room, she waved at me with the trust of a child who still believed her parents would always protect her. I waved back, knowing that after today nothing would ever be the same. Richard finally arrived 4 hours later, just as Emma was being moved to recovery. He burst through the doors carrying coffee and apologies, his hair slightly mussed and his tie askew. When he hugged me, I smelled perfume that wasn't mine clinging to his shirt. How is she? I came as soon as I got your messages. The lie came so easily to him that I almost believed it myself. Almost. Richard's phone rang at 7:23 a.m. while he showered. The caller ID displayed Sarah Morrison, a name I'd never heard despite knowing every colleague, client, and contact in my husband's professional life. Something about the early hour felt intimate, personal. Business calls didn't happen before 8 unless they were emergencies. I answered without thinking. Good morning, gorgeous. Ready for tonight's dinner reservation? The woman's voice carried a warmth that made my stomach drop. She spoke with the casual confidence of someone who'd made this call countless times before. I'm sorry, who is this? Silence stretched between us before she cleared her throat. Oh. Is Richard available? This is his wife. Who are you? The line went dead. When Richard emerged from the bathroom, towel wrapped around his waist, I held his phone toward him. Sarah Morrison called. She seemed to think you had dinner plans tonight. His face remained perfectly composed, but I caught the microscopic pause before he smiled. Sarah's a paralegal from the downtown office. We're working on the Henderson case together. Must be about reviewing depositions over dinner. The explanation came too smoothly, too quickly. Like he'd rehearsed it. She called you gorgeous. You must have misheard. Sarah's very professional. Richard took his phone and scrolled through recent calls, deleting something before slipping it into his briefcase. Probably said good morning, Hartwell, and the connection was bad. I wanted to believe him. Desperately. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew throughout the day as I sat beside Emma's hospital bed, watching monitors track her irregular heartbeat while Richard attended to urgent client matters that kept him away for 12 hours straight. That evening I called his office. Hartwell and Associates, this is Janet. Hi Janet, it's Claire. Is Richard still there reviewing depositions with Sarah Morrison? Sarah Morrison? I'm not familiar with that name, Mrs. Hartwell. And Mr. Richard left the office around 3 this afternoon. My hands trembled as I hung up. Another lie. Another carefully constructed story that crumbled under the slightest scrutiny. I hired Marcus Dalton, a private investigator recommended by my divorce attorney friend Linda, telling myself I needed facts before making accusations that could destroy our family. The retainer cost $3,000, money I withdrew from our joint savings account, the same account I'd been carefully managing to cover Emma's mounting medical expenses. Marcus called 5 days later. Mrs. Hartwell, I have the photos you requested. Would you prefer to meet somewhere private? We met at a coffee shop across town, far from anywhere Richard might appear. Marcus slid a manila envelope across the small table, his expression sympathetic but professional. The first photo showed Richard and an attractive blonde woman entering Morton's Steakhouse downtown. She wore a red dress that probably cost more than Emma's last cardiology appointment. Richard's hand rested possessively on her lower back as they walked through the restaurant entrance. The second photo was taken on a yacht. Richard lounged in white linen pants and a navy blazer, champagne glass raised toward the camera. Sarah sat beside him in a designer bikini, her legs draped across his lap. They looked like a couple celebrating an anniversary. The timestamp showed last Tuesday, the same day Emma had been readmitted to the hospital with fluid around her heart. There are 17 more photos, Marcus said quietly. Restaurants, hotels, weekend trips to the Hamptons. This has been going on for at least 8 months, possibly longer. 8 months. Emma's diagnosis was 13 months ago. Richard had started his affair shortly after learning our daughter had a chronic, expensive medical condition. How much is he spending on her? Marcus pulled out a second folder. Your husband is very careful about his main accounts, but I traced several large cash withdrawals and credit card charges. Jewelry purchases, hotel suites, the yacht rental. Conservative estimate? $40,000 over the past 6 months. $40,000. I'd been clipping coupons and buying generic groceries, worrying about copays and deductibles while Richard spent enough money to cover Emma's treatment for an entire year on his girlfriend's entertainment. There's something else, Marcus continued. The yacht photos were posted on Sarah's social media. She's been documenting their relationship pretty extensively online. He showed me Sarah's Instagram account on his phone. Photo after photo of romantic dinners, weekend getaways, expensive gifts. In one picture she wore diamond earrings while toasting with champagne. The caption read, "When he spoils you just because it's Wednesday." The earrings were identical to ones I'd admired in a jewelry store window 6 months ago. Richard had said they were too expensive, that we needed to be more careful with money given Emma's medical situation. That night I waited until Richard fell asleep before searching his home office. He kept everything meticulously organized, legal files arranged alphabetically, financial documents sorted by date. I found his digital recorder tucked behind a row of law journals, probably forgotten after a client meeting. I pressed play on the most recent recording. Richard's voice filled the quiet office. I swear, Sarah, sometimes I think this whole situation is punishment for something. Emma's medical bills are bleeding us dry, and Claire acts like I'm supposed to be grateful for having a sick kid. That must be so hard for you, baby. Sarah's voice was smooth, sympathetic. You know what the worst part is? I always wanted a son. Someone I could teach to play catch, take to baseball games. Instead, I got stuck with a daughter who can barely climb stairs without passing out. And now she's going to cost us everything. She's lucky to have you as a father. Lucky? I call her the burden I didn't sign up for behind Claire's back. Sounds terrible, but it's true. I married Claire thinking we'd have a normal family. 2 kids, maybe 3. Healthy kids who'd carry on the family name. Instead, I'm spending my prime earning years on cardiologists and medications for a kid who might not even make it to 18. I stopped the recording, my hands shaking so violently I could barely press the button. The man I'd married, the father I'd believed loved our daughter unconditionally, had reduced Emma to a financial burden and genetic disappointment. Emma, who practiced piano pieces she thought would make Daddy proud. Emma, who saved her allowance to buy him coffee mugs with "World's Best Dad" printed on the side. Emma, who still asked every night when Daddy would have time to read her bedtime stories. Over the following weeks, Richard's absences became more brazen. He'd leave 4 emergency depositions that his secretary knew nothing about. Client dinners that lasted until 2 a.m. Weekend conferences in cities where no legal events were scheduled. Meanwhile, Emma's condition deteriorated rapidly. Dr. Martinez increased her medications and scheduled more frequent monitoring appointments. The hospital's social worker began visiting our room, subtly questioning why Emma's father never appeared during her stays. Some dads have trouble handling their children's illness, she explained gently. But family support is crucial for recovery. I nodded and made excuses, protecting Richard's reputation even as he destroyed our family from the inside. Emma never directly asked where Daddy was anymore, but I caught her watching the door during visiting hours, hope flickering in her eyes every time footsteps approached. When those footsteps belonged to nurses or other patients' families, her expression would dim slightly before she forced another brave smile. The night before Emma died, she looked directly at me with eyes too wise for a 10-year-old. "Mommy, is Daddy angry with me for being sick?" The question shattered something fundamental inside me. Despite my efforts to shield her, Emma had sensed Richard's rejection. She'd internalized his absence as her own fault. "No, sweetheart. Daddy loves you very much. He's just..." But I couldn't finish the lie. Not anymore. Emma died at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I held her hand as her heart monitor flatlined, listening to the mechanical beep that meant my world had ended. The nurses moved with practiced efficiency, checking vitals one final time before Dr. Martinez officially called it. In the sudden silence that followed, I kissed Emma's forehead and whispered that I loved her. Richard arrived at the hospital 30 minutes later, still wearing yesterday's clothes and smelling like wine. He burst through the door of Emma's room expecting to find her sleeping, stopping short when he saw the covered bed and my tear-streaked face. "Claire, when did she? Where were you?" My voice came out flat, emotionless. "Your daughter died asking for you and you weren't here. I was stuck in traffic. My phone died and..." "Stop." I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady from hours of sitting. "Just stop lying." For a moment, Richard's mask slipped. I saw something cold flicker across his face before the grief performance resumed. He approached Emma's bed with appropriate reverence, placing his hand on the small form beneath the hospital blanket. "My beautiful girl," he whispered, loud enough for the lingering nurses to hear. "Daddy's here now." The hypocrisy made bile rise in my throat. Word spread quickly through our social circle. By noon, our house filled with visitors bearing casseroles and condolences. Richard transformed into the perfect grieving father, accepting hugs and sharing memories with anyone who'd listen. He spoke eloquently about Emma's bravery, her beautiful spirit, how proud he was to be her daddy. "She always waited up for me to get home from work," he told our neighbor Mrs. Patterson, his voice breaking at just the right moment. "Every night, no matter how late, she'd run to the door when she heard my car." Mrs. Patterson dabbed her eyes with a tissue. "That girl adored you, Richard. You were her hero." I excused myself to the kitchen before I said something I'd regret. Richard's parents arrived from Chicago that evening. Margaret and Harold Hartwell had always treated me kindly, but Emma held a special place in their hearts as their only grandchild. Margaret collapsed into Richard's arms the moment she walked through our front door. "Oh, my poor boy. How are you holding up?" "I'm taking it one day at a time, Mom. Emma wouldn't want us to fall apart." Harold patted Richard's shoulder with paternal pride. "That's the spirit, son. You're being so strong for Claire." Strong for Claire. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Richard hadn't been strong for me once during Emma's entire illness. He'd been too busy planning yacht trips with his girlfriend. Over the next 2 days, Richard threw himself into funeral preparations with the dedication of a campaign manager. He met with the funeral director, selected an expensive casket with pink roses carved into the mahogany, and insisted on upgrading to the premium service package. "Emma deserves the best," he told everyone who questioned the cost. "Money doesn't matter when you're saying goodbye to your daughter." He commissioned a professional videographer to create a montage of Emma's life, carefully selecting photos that showed him as an involved, loving father. Beach vacations where he'd posed with Emma for exactly as long as it took to snap the picture. Christmas mornings where he'd sat beside her just long enough for the camera timer to capture their moment. Birthday parties where he'd appeared briefly between phone calls. The video made him look devoted. I knew better. Richard spent hours crafting his eulogy, writing and rewriting until every word conveyed maximum emotional impact. He practiced in his study, projecting his voice with courtroom confidence while discussing unconditional love and cherished memories. "I want to honor her properly," he explained when I found him rehearsing. "Emma was such a special little girl. Everyone should know how much her daddy loved her." Meanwhile, I made my own quiet arrangements. I called St. Mark's Church and spoke with Father Morrison about the sound system. My husband wants to play something special during the service, I explained. A recording that was meaningful to Emma. He's very particular about it being a surprise. Father Morrison assured me the technical setup would be ready. It's wonderful when fathers prepare something so personal. Your husband clearly loved Emma very much. Yes, I replied. Everyone will finally see exactly how much. The night before the funeral, Richard's entire family gathered at our house for what Margaret called a celebration of Emma's life. They shared stories, looked through photo albums, and praised Richard's strength during this difficult time. Emma was so lucky to have you as her father, Richard's sister Jennifer said, squeezing his hand. You gave that little girl such a wonderful life. I tried my best, Richard replied humbly. I just wish I'd had more time with her. More time. The man who'd spent Emma's final months avoiding her was now lamenting lost opportunities for connection. Harold raised his wine glass in a toast. To Richard, who showed Emma every day how much her daddy loved her. She knew she was cherished. Everyone clinked glasses while I sat silently, thinking about Emma's last question. Is Daddy angry with me for being sick? Later that evening, after the family had gone to their hotel, Richard found me in Emma's room. I was sitting on her bed, holding the diary where she'd written about loving her father despite everything. Claire, I know this is hard, but we need to think about moving forward. Emma wouldn't want us stuck in grief forever. Moving forward. Less than 12 hours after our daughter's death, he was already planning our future without her. Did you love her? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Richard looked genuinely shocked. Of course I loved Emma. She was my daughter. Then why weren't you here? Why were you always somewhere else when she needed you? I was working, Claire. Someone had to provide for this family, especially with all the medical expenses. Everything I did was for you and Emma. The lies came so naturally to him that I wondered if he'd started believing them himself. The morning of the funeral, I woke before dawn and sat in Emma's room until sunrise. Her stuffed animals lined the shelves and her drawings covered the walls. In every picture of our family, she'd drawn herself in the middle, holding both parents' hands. The eternal optimist who believed love could fix anything. I got dressed carefully, choosing a black dress Emma had always complimented. In my purse, I carried her diary and the digital recorder containing Richard's conversation with Sarah. 2 pieces of evidence that would finally reveal the truth about the man everyone thought was a devoted father. At the church, Richard greeted mourners with perfect composure. He shook hands, accepted condolences, and thanked people for coming with the grace of a politician. Watching him perform, I almost admired his skill. He'd convinced an entire community that he was a loving father destroyed by loss. Standing in the vestibule, watching Richard comfort Emma's teacher and classmates, I felt my resolve waver. Part of me wondered if I was making a mistake. Would exposing him honor Emma's memory or destroy it? Then I remembered her voice asking if Daddy was angry with her for being sick. I remembered the recording where he called her a burden. I remembered every hospital visit where she'd watched the door hopefully, waiting for a father who never came. Emma deserved better than Richard's performance. She deserved the truth. Father Morrison signaled that it was time to begin. Richard took his place near the podium, eulogy in hand, ready to deliver his final performance as the perfect father. I took my place near the sound system, Richard's recorder hidden in my palm, ready to let everyone hear who he really was. The church fell silent as Richard stepped up to the podium, his eulogy clutched in manicured hands. 200 mourners sat expectantly in wooden pews, tissues ready, hearts prepared to be moved by a father's tribute to his beloved daughter. The morning light streamed through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across Emma's white casket adorned with pink roses. Friends, family, beloved colleagues, Richard began, his voice carrying the practiced resonance of countless courtroom presentations. We gather today to celebrate the beautiful life of my precious daughter, Emma Claire Hartwell. He paused for effect, letting emotion crack his voice just enough to seem authentic. I watched from the front row as he gazed lovingly at Emma's photograph displayed beside the casket, a school picture where she smiled with gap-toothed innocence. Emma taught me what unconditional love truly means, Richard continued. Every day with her was a gift. The bedtime stories we shared, the way she'd run to greet me when I came home from work, her excitement when we spent father-daughter time together. My stomach turned. Richard had never read Emma a bedtime story in her life. She'd stopped running to greet him months ago when his rejections became too painful. Their father-daughter time consisted of him checking his phone while she desperately tried to capture his attention. As her father, I was blessed to witness her courage in the face of illness. Emma never complained, never asked why this happened to her. She simply focused on living each day with joy and... I stood up. The movement caught Richard's attention mid-sentence. He looked at me questioningly, probably assuming I was too overcome with grief to remain seated. Several mourners turned to offer sympathetic glances. Before Richard continues, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the church's acoustics. He recorded something special for Emma that he'd like you all to hear. Richard's face went completely white. The blood drained so quickly I thought he might faint. His mouth opened and closed wordlessly as I walked toward the sound system with deliberate steps. Claire, what are you? You wanted everyone to know how much you loved Emma, I interrupted, pulling the digital recorder from my purse. This will show them exactly how you felt about our daughter. Don't. The word came out as a whisper, but in the church's silence, everyone heard it. I connected the recorder to the sound system. Father Morrison looked confused but didn't intervene, assuming this was part of the planned service. Richard gripped the podium edges, his knuckles turning white. I pressed play. Richard's voice filled the sacred space with crystal clarity. I swear, Sarah, sometimes I think this whole situation is punishment for something. Emma's medical bills are bleeding us dry, and Claire acts like I'm supposed to be grateful for having a sick kid. The congregation's collective intake of breath was audible. Heads turned toward Richard, then back to me, processing what they were hearing. Margaret Hartwell's hand flew to her mouth in horror. Sarah's voice responded through the speakers. That must be so hard for you, baby. You know what the worst part is? I always wanted a son. Someone I could teach to play catch, take to baseball games. Instead, I got stuck with a daughter who can barely climb stairs without passing out. And now she's going to cost us everything. A woman in the third row gasped audibly. Richard's law partner, James Mitchell, stared at him with undisguised shock. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, covered her face with her hands. She's lucky to have you as a father, Sarah's voice continued. Lucky? I call her the burden I didn't sign up for behind Claire's back. Sounds terrible, but it's true. I married Claire thinking we'd have a normal family. 2 kids, maybe 3. Healthy kids who'd carry on the family name. Instead, I'm spending my prime earning years on cardiologists and medications for a kid who might not even make it to 18. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard stood frozen at the podium, his eulogy forgotten, his face ashen. Margaret Hartwell began crying, not tears of grief but tears of shame and disbelief. I walked to the podium where Richard stood paralyzed and placed Emma's diary in his trembling hands, opening it to the page I'd marked with a pink ribbon. Read it, I said quietly, but my voice carried through the sound system's microphone. Richard's hands shook so violently he could barely hold the small book. He looked down at Emma's careful handwriting and began reading aloud, his voice breaking. My dad is the best dad in the whole world and I love him so much. Even though he's always busy at work and spends little time with me, I still think he's the best. I know he works hard to take care of Mommy and me. Sometimes I wish he could come to my dance recitals or read me stories like other daddies do, but I understand he has important things to do. I hope someday when I'm better we can spend more time together. I love you, Daddy. The date at the top of the entry was 3 weeks before Emma died. Richard's brother David stood up abruptly, his face twisted with disgust. He walked out of the church without a word, his footsteps echoing through the silence. His wife Jennifer followed, shaking her head and wiping away tears. Margaret Hartwell finally found her voice. Richard, how could you? Harold Hartwell sat stone-faced, staring at his son with the look of a man who no longer recognized his own child. 38 years, he said quietly. 38 years I've been proud to call you my son. Emma's classmates whispered among themselves, too young to fully understand but old enough to know something terrible had happened. Their parents gathered them closer, protective instincts activated by the revelation of Richard's cruelty. Dr. Martinez rose from his seat near the back. Mrs. Hartwell, he said, approaching me with tears in his eyes, I'm so sorry. I had no idea what you were dealing with alone. Other parents from Emma's school surrounded me with embraces. Women who'd wondered why Richard never attended school events. Men who'd questioned his absence from father-daughter activities, all finally understanding the truth. "I knew something wasn't right," whispered Tom Patterson, whose daughter had been Emma's best friend. "Emma always made excuses for why her dad couldn't come to things." Richard tried to speak. "You don't understand. We understand perfectly," interrupted Father Morrison, his usual gentle demeanor replaced by cold judgment. "I think you should leave." Richard looked around desperately, seeking even one sympathetic face in the crowd. He found none. His law partners avoided eye contact. His family members turned away. His golf buddies from the country club suddenly found their shoes fascinating. "Claire, please let me explain." "There's nothing to explain," I said, taking the microphone. "Everyone has heard exactly who you are." Richard stumbled down from the podium, his expensive suit wrinkled, his perfect hair disheveled. He moved toward the exit like a man walking through quicksand, each step heavier than the last. At the church doors he turned back one final time. "Emma was my daughter too." "No," I replied, my voice steady despite the tears flowing down my cheeks. "Emma deserved a father. You were just the man who helped create her." The heavy wooden doors closed behind him with a resonant thud. I returned to the podium, looking out at the congregation of people who'd loved Emma genuinely. Emma would want us to remember her with joy, not anger. Let me tell you about the real Emma, the brave, loving little girl who saw beauty in everything, even when her world was full of pain. For the next 20 minutes, I shared stories of Emma's actual life. Her determination to keep dancing even when her heart condition made it difficult. The way she befriended every child in the hospital's pediatric wing. How she saved her allowance to buy gifts for others. Her infectious laughter during our movie nights when Richard was working late. The congregation listened with genuine emotion, finally hearing about the real Emma instead of Richard's fabricated version. They laughed at stories of her mischief, cried at examples of her kindness, and celebrated the remarkable spirit of a little girl who'd touched their lives. It was the funeral Emma deserved, honest, authentic, and filled with true love rather than performed grief. The reception following Emma's funeral was held at our house, a gathering I'd arranged weeks ago when I still believed Richard would be standing beside me, accepting condolences as the grieving father. Instead, I stood alone in our living room, surrounded by people who'd witnessed his public downfall just hours earlier. Margaret Hartwell approached me with red-rimmed eyes, her usual composed demeanor completely shattered. "Claire, I need to speak with you privately." We stepped into the kitchen while Harold remained in the living room, accepting sympathy from guests who seemed unsure whether to comfort him or distance themselves from the family scandal. "How long?" Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "How long did you know what kind of man my son really was?" "Not long enough to protect Emma from it." I poured coffee with hands that had finally stopped shaking. "I found out about Sarah 8 months ago." The recording. "I only discovered that a few weeks before Emma died." Margaret covered her face with her hands. 38 years I've been proud of that boy. 38 years of bragging to my friends about my successful, devoted son. How did I raise someone capable of such cruelty? You didn't raise that man, Margaret. Richard chose to become him. She looked up at me with eyes that held a mother's agony. Emma loved him so much. She'd show me her drawings of their family, tell me stories about waiting for Daddy to come home. I thought he was just busy with work. We all did. I called him an hour ago, Margaret continued, her voice breaking. I told him to return his father's watch, his grandfather's ring, everything that connects him to our family name. He doesn't deserve to carry anything that belonged to decent men. The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Martinez, who'd stayed for the reception despite the chaos. "Mrs. Hartwell, I wanted you to know that several of us from the hospital are planning a memorial garden for Emma. The children's wing has been touched by her story." "That's very kind. Also," he hesitated, "I need to apologize. There were signs that Emma felt rejected at home. As her doctor, I should have addressed that more directly. You couldn't have known the extent of it." Richard was very good at playing his role. As guests began leaving, each offering final condolences and carefully avoiding any mention of Richard, I noticed several law firm colleagues huddled near the front door. They spoke in hushed tones, occasionally glancing toward the house with expressions of professional concern. James Mitchell, Richard's law partner, approached me before leaving. Claire, I want you to know the firm is conducting a thorough review of Richard's recent cases. If there are any irregularities related to his personal situation, we'll handle them appropriately. The implication was clear. Richard's credibility was so damaged that every case he'd touched was now suspect. That evening, after the last guest departed, I sat in Emma's room surrounded by the silence Richard had always claimed to need for his work. The house felt enormous without his presence, but not empty, peaceful in a way it hadn't been for months. My phone rang constantly over the next few days. Richard's college roommate called, confused and horrified after hearing about the funeral from mutual friends. Emma's dance teacher wanted to share memories of my daughter's determination and kindness. Even my sister, who lived across the country, called to express her shock. I never liked Richard, she admitted, but I never imagined he was capable of something like this. That poor baby loved him so much. On Thursday, exactly 1 week after Emma's funeral, I began my final act of revenge. I'd spent 3 days carefully crafting packages for everyone in Richard's professional and personal circle. Each contained a copy of his recording with Sarah, photocopies of Emma's most heartfelt diary entries about loving her daddy, and a simple note, for when you start to miss him. The list was extensive. Every law firm partner, his golf buddies from the country club, his college fraternity brothers, former neighbors, even his dentist and personal trainer. I wanted to ensure that no corner of Richard's world remained untouched by the truth. I mailed 47 packages that morning. The responses began within hours. Dr. Peterson, Richard's former golf partner, called to express his disgust and support for my decision to expose him. I always wondered why he never talked about Emma during our rounds. Now I understand. Sarah Williams from the country club left a voicemail. Claire, I had no idea what you were going through. Richard always spoke so lovingly about Emma when he was around us. What a performance that must have been. But the most unexpected call came from Marcus Dalton, my private investigator. Mrs. Hartwell, I have some additional information about Sarah Morrison that you might want to know. I think I've heard enough about her. She was pregnant, Marcus said quietly. During the last few months of Emma's illness, Sarah was carrying Richard's child. She miscarried right around the time Emma passed away. The information hit me like a physical blow. While Emma was dying, Richard had been anticipating a new child with his mistress. A healthy child who might have been the son he'd always wanted. There's more, Marcus continued. I showed Sarah the funeral footage. It's already circulating online. She contacted me this morning, wanting to share Richard's reaction when she told him about the pregnancy. What did he say? He was thrilled, called it a fresh start, and talked about finally having a child who wouldn't be a burden. Sarah ended their relationship immediately after seeing the recording. She said even she couldn't be with someone who spoke that way about his dying daughter. After hanging up, I sat in Richard's former study, looking at the empty bookshelves where his law journals once stood. He'd moved out the previous weekend while I was visiting Emma's grave, taking only his clothes and personal items. The removal had been surgical, efficient, like everything else Richard did when he wanted to avoid unpleasant confrontations. His absence left physical gaps throughout the house. Empty spaces on walls where his diplomas had hung. Bare shelves where his awards and trophies once displayed his achievements. The garage where his Mercedes had been parked, now echoed with emptiness. But Emma's room remained exactly as she'd left it. Her stuffed animals arranged on the bed, her drawings taped to the walls, her diary sitting on the nightstand where I'd found it. This room held more love and authenticity than Richard had ever brought to our home. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet, Richard's former secretary. Mrs. Hartwell, Mr. Richard cleared out his office today. Partners asked him to resign. Thought you should know. Another message came from Tom Patterson next door. Claire, Richard drove by the house this morning but didn't stop. Looked like he wanted to come to the door but couldn't work up the courage. I wondered what Richard could possibly want to say. What words could explain away the recording? What excuse could justify his treatment of Emma? What apology could erase the damage he'd done to a little girl who'd loved him unconditionally? The house phone rang that evening. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Claire. Richard's voice was barely recognizable, hoarse, broken, stripped of its usual confidence. I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but I need to explain. I hung up without saying a word. Some explanations come too late. Some betrayals cut too deep for words to heal. Some truths once revealed change everything forever. Richard had spent years building a reputation as a successful lawyer, devoted husband and loving father. In one 20-minute recording, all of it crumbled. The respect he'd cultivated, the relationships he'd maintained, the image he'd projected, all of it was gone. But Emma's love had been real. Her diary entries proved that. Her kindness to other sick children, her determination to keep dancing, her hope that Daddy would someday have time for her, that was authentic in a way Richard's performance never could be. As I locked the house that night, I realized that Richard's greatest punishment wasn't the public humiliation or professional ruin. It was finally understanding what he'd lost, and knowing it was too late to get it back. 6 months after Richard's departure, I found myself questioning everything I'd done. The house felt like a museum of my former life, perfectly preserved but devoid of the energy that had once filled it. I spent most evenings in Emma's room, reading her diary entries and trying to understand if exposing Richard had been justice or just another form of cruelty. The satisfaction I'd anticipated never came. Richard was professionally destroyed, socially exiled, and emotionally broken, exactly what I'd wanted when I pressed play on that recording. But Emma was still gone. Her laugh didn't echo through the hallways. Her dance shoes still sat by the front door, waiting for feet that would never wear them again. The first unexpected contact came on a rainy Thursday in November. A woman named Patricia Collins called, her voice tentative and nervous. "Mrs. Hartwell, I saw the news coverage of your daughter's funeral. I know this might sound strange, but I needed to talk to someone who would understand." Patricia's husband had been emotionally absent during their son's battle with leukemia, treating the child's illness as an inconvenience that disrupted his business schedule. Unlike Richard, he'd never been caught on tape expressing his feelings, but Patricia recognized the pattern of coldness, the prioritizing of everything except the sick child who needed him most. "I've been making excuses for him for 3 years," she confided. "Telling myself he grieves differently, that he shows love through providing financially. But after hearing about Emma, I realized I've been protecting a man who sees our son as a burden." The call lasted 2 hours. By the end, Patricia had decided to file for divorce. More calls followed. Women from across the country who'd read about Emma's story online, mothers who'd watched their husbands emotionally abandon sick children, wives who'd covered for men who couldn't love unconditionally when that love was tested by real hardship. Emma's story had become something larger than my personal revenge. It opened conversations about emotional neglect that families had been hiding behind closed doors for generations. A support group formed, meeting monthly at our local community center. We called it Emma's Circle, a safe space for parents dealing with partners who couldn't handle the reality of imperfect children. Dr. Sarah, a family therapist who'd lost her own daughter to cancer, began attending our meetings. "What happened to Emma represents a type of abuse that's rarely discussed," she explained during one session. "Emotional abandonment of sick children by parents who can't accept anything less than perfection." I became an accidental advocate, speaking at medical conferences about recognizing the signs of parental emotional neglect in pediatric settings. Emma's diary excerpts were shared with hospital social workers, helping them identify families where one parent had checked out emotionally while the other carried the entire burden alone. Through mutual friends, I learned fragments of Richard's new reality. He'd taken a job at a legal aid clinic downtown, representing clients who couldn't afford better representation. The work paid a fraction of his former salary, but it was the only position available to a lawyer whose reputation had been completely destroyed. Linda Peterson, whose husband occasionally played golf with Richard's former colleagues, provided updates during our coffee meetings. "He's lost 30 pounds, she reported. "Lives in a studio apartment near the clinic. People say he barely speaks anymore, just does his work and goes home." The country club had revoked his membership after several families complained about feeling uncomfortable around him. His alma mater removed his name from a scholarship fund he'd established years earlier. The local bar association launched an ethics investigation that, while it found no legal violations, further damaged his professional standing. "Tom saw him at the grocery store last week," Linda continued. "Said Richard looked right through him, like he didn't recognize people he'd known for years. Apparently he's become a ghost of himself." Part of me felt vindicated hearing these reports. Richard was experiencing consequences proportional to his cruelty toward Emma. But another part, a part that surprised me, felt nothing at all. His suffering couldn't restore the father-daughter relationship Emma had deserved. His isolation couldn't erase the nights she'd waited by the window for him to come home. On Emma's second birthday after her death, I visited her grave for the first time without anger burning in my chest. The memorial garden the hospital had created was flourishing pink roses and white daisies surrounding a small bronze plaque with Emma's name and the inscription, "She taught us that love doesn't count conditions." I brought her diary and read several entries aloud, focusing on the moments of joy she'd found despite Richard's coldness. Her excitement about learning a new dance move. Her friendship with other children in the hospital. Her pride in helping me bake cookies for the nurses. "You know what, sweetheart?" I said to the headstone. "I think you got the last word after all. People remember your love, not his cruelty. That's got to count for something." The revenge had served its purpose. Richard could never hurt another child the way he'd hurt Emma because everyone who mattered knew exactly who he was. But healing, I realized, came from celebrating Emma's capacity for joy despite her circumstances, not from dwelling on Richard's failures as a father. 2 years and 7 months after Emma's death, I found an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. The handwriting was shaky, uncertain, nothing like Richard's usual confident script. I almost threw it away without opening it. The letter was written on plain notebook paper, the kind students use for homework assignments. Richard's words were careful, measured, as if he'd written and rewritten each sentence multiple times. "Claire," it began, "I know I have no right to contact you and I don't expect a response. Today marks 3 years since Emma died, and I can't let this anniversary pass without acknowledging what I lost through my own blindness and selfishness. I have nightmares where Emma asks why I didn't love her the way she deserved. In these dreams she's holding the diary you made me read at her funeral, pointing to the words where she called me the best daddy in the world. I wake up every night knowing I was the worst. The recording plays in my head constantly. My own voice calling her a burden echoes in every quiet moment. I hear myself expressing disappointment that she wasn't the son I wanted, and I understand now that I threw away something precious because it didn't match my selfish expectations. I don't ask for forgiveness because I know it's impossible. I don't ask for understanding because my actions were unforgivable. I'm writing to thank you for showing me the truth about myself, even though it destroyed everything I thought I was. Emma deserved better than me. She deserved a father who celebrated her courage, her kindness, her beautiful spirit. Instead, she got a man too selfish to see past his own disappointments. I've left my job and my apartment. I can't run from what I did, but I can't continue living in a community where everyone knows the truth about how I failed my daughter. This is my last day in town. Thank you for protecting Emma's memory. Thank you for making sure the world knows who she really was, not the burden I saw her as, but the blessing I was too blind to recognize. I hope someday you can find peace. You deserved a partner who would have stood beside you during Emma's illness instead of running toward another woman. Emma deserved a father who would have cherished every moment with her instead of counting the cost of her care. I can't undo what I did, but I can disappear so you never have to face reminders of my failures again. Take care of yourself, Claire. Emma would want that. There was no signature, no forwarding address, no way to respond even if I'd wanted to. I sat in Emma's room holding the letter and feeling nothing but profound emptiness. Not satisfaction at Richard's apparent exile. Not forgiveness for his recognition of wrongdoing. Just the quiet acknowledgement that some damage transcends any attempt at redemption. The letter didn't change anything. Emma was still gone. The years of emotional neglect she'd endured couldn't be erased by Richard's belated understanding. But perhaps it confirmed that truth has consequences that extend far beyond the moment of revelation. I folded the letter and placed it in Emma's diary, between pages where she'd written about loving her daddy despite everything. Not because Richard deserved that proximity to her words, but because the complete story, including its tragic ending, belonged together. Outside Emma's window, the sun was setting on another day without her laughter. But her room remained filled with evidence of a life lived with remarkable grace despite being unloved by someone who should have treasured her. That, I realized, was victory enough. Emma's love outlasted every lie, every betrayal, every moment of rejection. Her story reminds us that truth always finds its way to light. Which part of Claire's journey touched your heart most deeply? Share your thoughts below, and if Emma's story moved you, please like and subscribe. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the most powerful messages.